Hey everybody, and welcome to another bonus episode of Cinemaholics. I'm your usual co-host, Will Ashton. John Negroni is unfortunately not here again. I'm given the keys to the car once more. However you feel about that, you're welcome, or I apologize, I guess. But thankfully, I'm not alone. Once again, joining us, he is a writer for Nashville Scene. He's also written for The Playlist and The Young Folks. You know him, you love him. It's Corey Woodruff. How you doing, man?
I'm good. It's nice to be loved, I guess. I mean, I'll take it. I think the last time I did this was this summer. I was on for me and John did one on Bo Burnham Inside.
Oh, yeah.
Which I don't think you've watched yet.
I have not watched Bo Burnham Inside. That is another Netflix release, though.
It is.
Yeah. I don't know. I've debated whether I'll watch that for my end of the year, because I assume it's going to be on some top 10 list or something, right?
Yeah, I'm still trying to debate whether I'm going to put it as a movie or not. Like, it's difficult.
I mean,
it's like
they put it in theaters for the cachet of being a movie,
yes.
So I don't know. If I were a purist, I'd say it's a Netflix special, but they're clearly trying to make it a film or have film credibility. So
yeah.
I would say it counts. There have been Netflix specials, or sorry, stand-up specials. I mean, that have been theatrically released, so it's not out of the norm. But that's another film. That's not what we're talking about today. Today we're going to be talking about The Harder They Fall, which is a revisionist Western that just came out. It was in theaters briefly for like a 2-week or so run, and now it's on Netflix. It's directed and written, or co-written at least, by James Samuel, and it has pretty much an all-star cast. I mean, we got Jonathan Majors in here, Idris Elba, Zazie Beetz, Regina King, Delroy Lindo, Lakeith Stanfield, R.J. Seiler, Dion Cole, a bunch of people you know and like, and it's just yeah. So I think you had more expectations for this, Corey, than I did, because this one kind of came under the radar for me. I'd heard about it, but I didn't know too much about it. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those movies where we're beginning to see studios realize, like, including the streamers like Netflix, Amazon, that, like, these mid-budget adult films are not going to sustain themselves unless you get these really starry casts.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, like, this is what old Hollywood used to do, where if they really wanted to get people to show up to movies, they would just load the thing with all the actors either they had on contract or that they could kind of rope into the production. And, like, again, I know people like to think that, like, the Avengers and MCU were, like, the first people to put these just big, audacious ensembles together. That's not true at all. This was going on well in Hollywood's history. That style of building ensemble kind of faded out a bit when you began to see actors get bigger pay raises, and they would kind of become more star-centric. Like, instead of having 8 really cool actors in one movie, it would be, like, one. And, then you would kind of structure the entire plot, and because that's what you had the money for. And then when the age of the real, like, bona fide movie star came in, and particularly, when you began to get IP involved, and when, those kind of single starring action movies and dramas really kind of came to fruition, kind of post New Age, like, it became very out of date, and it was hard to get that many actors together because it was just so expensive. But now that Hollywood has kind of shifted away from the movie star-centric environment, more towards like an IP thing, where someone has put before, like, instead of, Ben Affleck being a major movie star who gets people to show up to movies, now it's like Iron Man and Batman are like the big quote-unquote celebrities driving business. So you're beginning to see actors more willing to, like, take less pay in order to do these types of movies where they can more showcase their talents. And because, again, I think people forget that, like, actors want these movies to survive. Like, this is not just an issue where it's just like they just want to do the superhero movies. Those pay well, but they don't provide much of an acting challenge as opposed to kind of what's classically trained in the art. So you're beginning to see these, like, really, really starry, dramas and mid-budget films and westerns and comedies and all this start to come out that, have a lot of these really cool actors in them because they're all taking pay cuts in order to keep these things going. So I think with Netflix, who obviously can pay people what they want, they've got a really cool, promising cast some really cool established people, some folks who were clearly on their way up. And like, this was an example to me of like all these really exciting, cool people coming together. And obviously the director, Jamie Samuel, hadn't made anything yet. So that was kind of, not in a major cinematic way. But that was really why I was just so excited. And I love Westerns, so it's probably one of my favorite genres of filmmaking. And, that's one of the ones where it's like I really have gone and seen, a good bunch of the stuff that's came from the past. And I feel decently versed in it. Maybe not like an expert, but I know kind of the history of the genre and how it's evolved. And it just seemed like a cool opportunity. But my biggest thing is, like, of all the genres, like, that's the one I want to see in the theater the most. And I had the opportunity to do that with this one. So that was partly why I was also kind of excited when I knew for sure that was going to happen.
Yeah, I'm a bit jealous. I actually just saw it at home. There were a couple theaters near me that were playing it in theaters, but I didn't find out about that until when it was a little bit too late. But yeah, this one, I mean, Netflix has been, I think, slowly kind of pushing their stuff into theaters. You can see Red Notice right now in theaters. Tick, Tick, Boom is going to be in theaters, and Limited Engagement. Pretty soon, Power of the Dog is going to be in theaters. But yeah, this one is one of their most bona fide blockbusters, which, as you mentioned, is exciting because James Samuel is, and I don't know, we should mention at the top, I don't know if that's exactly how you pronounce his name, but I'm just going off of Google for that one. But yeah, James Samuel, as I think you said, his stage name is The Bullets. He's primarily known as a musician. This is his first film. He directed, I think, a few short films prior to this. But yeah, he really got, like, I don't exactly know what the budget is. Let me see if I can look it up. But I mean, he got quite, the cachet for a first feature film. And, certainly he's trying to really prove himself with this first film in a lot of respects. And the fact that he got such a esteemed cast is more than commendable. But yeah, at the same time, like you mentioned, it does seem like Netflix is, continuing to kind of establish themselves as a premier studio. They don't want to just be known as just a, kind of run-of-the-mill streamer, because I think there is, even though it's, the name of the game right now, there is kind of a stigma, I guess, with that as far as cinema is concerned. People are just like, oh, like, especially as far as the Academy is concerned, it's just like, oh, streaming movies are considered less than. And I do kind of find myself amused, like when you mentioned that people are coming to Westerns now to avoid superhero movies, because in a way, back in however many decades ago, Westerns were the name of the game, and people did like character dramas to avoid doing Westerns, and now it's kind of come full circle. So now people are doing Westerns to avoid superhero movies. Yeah, so, but yeah, I mean, the only thing I really knew about this film going into it was that Idris Elba was involved, and that Concrete Cowboy, when I saw that TIFF last year, I thought, oh, like a Western with Idris Elba, like, cool, like, awesome, like, I want to see that. And then that's not exactly what we got, close, but not quite. And then I heard, like, no, the movie you want is The Harder They Fall. And it's like, that's the, like, sort of traditional, also not quite traditional Western that happens to star Idris Elba, like you said, among other people. But yeah, I mean, so first, tell me a little bit about, like, have you seen any Netflix movies in theaters prior to this?
I have, actually. Okay. I've seen a good number of them in theaters. I think the very first time I saw a Netflix movie in theaters was, I want to say Roma.
Okay, yeah.
Because I did that. They had a press screening for it. And I've seen that. I've seen Marriage Story. Dolomite Is My Name. I've seen a couple. I will say they have been really good, at least where I am, like, with not like in non-pandemic times, putting these movies like in press screening formats. And then the Belcourt, I saw The Irishman in theaters, of course. Like, we have a good independent theater that has worked well with Netflix to get things on the screen. I'm seeing Power of the Dog as a press screening on Wednesday, which I'm really excited about because, again, another Netflix Western. And I think that one of the things that I've kind of had to come to terms with over time is, like, Netflix, they're doing their thing right now, and I don't necessarily feel like they're as dangerous towards the future of, like, theatrical release as people thought they were, because I think they're beginning to realize they're leaving a lot of money on the table by not at least giving these some sort of theatrical release, because, again, it's just tickets. I mean, it's just adding revenue, and I know that you have to kind of change up the way you do marketing, but, like, there is potential for them, and again, I think they want to be in theaters, because, again, like, they're not going to make a bajillion, Oscar movies. It feels like they're making a lot of Oscar movies a year now, and they're being very active in awards. But I think the long-term goal for them is to balance that approach with more stuff like Red Notice that will play, you know, in a sort of way. And I think they do want an IP movie deep down. I think they're going to want multiple of those, like every studio does. But
Yeah.
right now, they've seized, like the Apple and Amazon have, they've seized this like mid-budget adult market, and they're giving these movies opportunities or giving them budgets. And right now, it's like, even though they're not playing in major chain theaters, they're trying to give these things theatrical release. And in my mind, it's like, as much as you kind of hand-wring about streaming, it's like, you know, no one else is putting a Jane Campion Western in movie theaters. Like, no, like Warner Brothers wouldn't have done that. Fox wouldn't have done it. Like, these are studios that wouldn't have necessarily given that money, you know,
Maybe
the possibility.
Maybe 10 years ago, but not anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like, again, that used to be business, but now it's just like, you're more hesitant, and or maybe you might want bigger star than Benedict Cumberbatch, who is a big deal, but you may want to cast the movie differently, and you may want to try to plug it, you know, with like Will Smith can get away with it with King Richard at Warner Brothers, but like that's still a studio that still kind of wants to play the Oscar game. So the long and short, I guess what I'm saying is like I've had access to a decent amount of Netflix movies in theaters, which has kind of helped make up. Like Mudbound, I saw in theaters, so it's kind of helping make up for the kind of the anxiety I guess you get when you see like streamers like greenlight these movies, is that they seem like they're making an effort, and seeing this in a theater was awesome.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm definitely jealous. I wish I had that opportunity, especially considering how much of an outright blockbuster this is, let alone how stylish and fun-loving it is as well. But yeah, so like it sounds like I'm gonna take a shot in the dark and say you like the film.
You know, I did. Yeah. I did enjoy this movie a lot. Reasons why I liked it might be a little different from how I've enjoyed other Westerns. It kind of predated this one. But there's like one movie I'll say later that I think this plays the most to, that is a little bit newer in terms of the genre. But like, I mean, it's very much in that line of fine Western filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, I think deliberately kind of tread a line where it's hitting certain Western beats or certain expected Western beats, certain like characters fit into certain archetypes, playing to like certain expectations, but also, like we said, it's a revisionist Western. I'm assuming the movie you're referring to is probably Django Unchained. As far as
actually, no.
Oh, okay.
I think Django Unchained is, and you know, feel free to disagree with me, I think that movie was trying to directly more make a statement out of what it was trying to do, since it was so focused on the horrors of slavery.
Yeah.
And I feel like The Harder They Fall is the new Tombstone. Where it is like trying to revive the popcorn Western, because as much as like, I think the power of this film comes in the representation of the cast,
right?
And kind of flipping the archetypes and letting, you know, Black actors play these type of roles, because again, like they don't really touch on, I guess the context of the time is kind of hovering over it rather than it driving every scene, I suppose. Because again, in plot, this is a very traditional Western format. Like this is something you could have imagined John Wayne doing, you know, or maybe Gary Cooper or Jimmy Stewart. Like this is a very standard Western story, and like the script doesn't, I think. And again, it's almost like it kind of feels freed to where it's like, even though we're dealing with Black actors in a period piece, we don't necessarily just have to focus consistently on the trauma of what people went through at that time. That we can maybe tell stories that also focus on themes of empowerment, themes of, you know, skirting away from just having to be purely kind of reliving all of these things and kind of re-showing the history that has been very, I think, well documented in film's history of how horrible that time was. And I think you're beginning to kind of see an outcry of people being like, hey, let's empower Black artists to be able to tell the type of stories they want to tell without it having to always be about the pain that they've gone through, you know? So it's just like, I think that's why part of this movie is so cool, is that like, there are themes of racism playing into it at times, but it's not necessarily the entire scope of the film. And I think that's why it almost at times feels a little bit like, not necessarily shallow, but it's like, it's a popcorn movie. Like it's playing for the style. It's playing for the big moments with the gunfights and the excitement and the music kind of colliding and the really cool scope shots of people riding on horses and big vistas. And I felt like the way they built the sets, and it reminded me so much of Tombstone, where it's like, I don't know necessarily if this is going to be like, the quote unquote best movie of the year, but I think it's absolutely going to be one of the most enjoyable. Just pound for pound, this is just a blast of a movie to watch. And I really feel like it kind of takes that place of Tombstone, where it's like, and I think Tombstone's a great movie. And I think part of the reason it's great is just because it's so pulpy. And I think this film is just such a genre exercise that kind of feels freed about having to be so, kind of planted in the past, that it kind of feels fresh in a way. And I think that's what Tombstone did to the genre when it came out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I didn't directly think of Tombstone, but now that you mention it, it does seem like a very obvious point of comparison. I guess for me, when I was thinking of Django Unchained, I just think about how this movie is so clearly trying to mimic the spaghetti Western style, but also clearly like putting in modern influences, like fairly modern soundtrack, and like having, like kind of like these like, self-aware like title cards and all that stuff, and in a way that feels very deliberately in reference to Tarantino's film and Tarantino style. But
absolutely.
Because like I think you're getting to something that I found very interesting about the film, which is that watching it, I was kind of wondering, it's just like, okay, is there like a greater political message that it's trying to say, as far as, like you said, like with Django Unchained, there's a clear, like Tarantino's trying to say a lot through the character of Django. And I mean, however you feel about the film, he, has a message you want to say, and whether you feel it does it well or not, I think he makes that point come across. Whereas like with this film, like you said, it feels like it's more about honoring a time-honored genre, but incorporating and making it more inclusive in a way that we just simply haven't had too many opportunities for, a prominently Black cast like this to be in these parts and be an ensemble like this in a way that, like I said, it feels, it took me maybe a second to realize it, but something I did find very sort of cathartic about the film is that it is able to just kind of be its own thing without the pressure of feeling like it has to do all these different things at once. It's like, by existing, it of itself is a progressive and meaningful film. And I think that is something that I really admire about the film, and also something that I think makes it more enjoyable to watch. But at the same time, just on its own terms, it's just a well-made, slick, like you said, pulpy, entertaining film. And it's just, it's just a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I think people have kind of contextualized the Western in that spaghetti format now, to where it's like, if you're not thinking of John Wayne, that's the immediate thing that comes to mind, which is so interesting in the history of the Western, because the spaghetti Westerns at the time were kind of these very cheap productions that, like if you saw in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that like actors would flock to if that was kind of their last resort. And now they've become, obviously because of directors like Leone, like they've become image bearers almost into what people kind of think Westerns are. And I think that this film, it plays a lot of tribute to the spaghetti Western, of course. And it feels very Tarantino, it kind of evolved almost from kind of that, like, because again, between Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, they're the main two directors, I feel like, that came out in the 90s and like paid homage to all that kind of,
like remix.
Second. Yeah, exactly. Like they're the ones that kind of came out and like took all of the quote unquote lower line movies that weren't like the traditional grand Hollywood productions and kind of like gave them new life.
Right. I forget. No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just gonna say I was trying to remember if that was John or me that used that term, but I feel like like when I watch a Tarantino film, I feel like I'm watching like a remix of cinema, like all these classic influences. It's like, let me just kind of put my own little spin on it.
Yes.
So, sorry. Not to interrupt.
And honestly, Scorsese did the same thing. I mean, I feel like we so often, I mean, the film is it's an evolving dialogue with the past, and I think that's why when people kind of like thumb their nose at some of the more modern directors who like kind of break off the past, I mean, that's the whole language of film. It's like, it's a continual conversation between all these different artists, between like what they liked, what they didn't like, what they did, how they're kind of pushing forward what they did. I mean, again, like one of my favorite movies from the 90s is Swingers, and that does a complete like open homage to Reservoir Dogs and talking about the habit that movies got into trying to copy that format, which in and of itself, Tarantino robbed a bunch of things to make Reservoir Dogs from the past. So it's just like, and I think that's why movies like this are cool, is because James Samuel is clearly trying to do some of what Tarantino was doing, but I think he's pretty well versed. I mean, I kind of caught some kind of general like plot themes of stuff you find in like Howard Hawks and John Ford, and that style of, the golden oldie, I suppose, which obviously those films have to be looked at in proper context of when they were made and what they're saying. And I think that one of the cool things about the Western is you can go back and say, oh, I know some of these movies are the John Wayne traditional, there's racism, there's a lack of proper context, but a lot of the old Westerns are incredibly smart movies that are trying to say some really progressive things. Like, I mean, goodness gracious, the totality of High Noon was just a huge commentary on the blacklist that was going on in Hollywood. So it's just like, and then, when Hawks made Rio Bravo, he was having a commentary between, I think, as kind of they've talked about, of, responding to High Noon and, the difference of the way that Wayne and them viewed Hollywood. It's just, the history of the Western is so interesting because, it was very subversive while at the same time being incredibly dated. And I think that when, people like Peckinpah started to really show you what the West was actually like, and I think John Ford did a little bit of that in The Searchers, with the way that he kind of depicted Wayne as kind of against type, because he's a very dark character in that. But when Peckinpah, especially with Ride the High Country, I mean, putting those two guys in there that have been like the staples of doing these classic Westerns in a very dark, R-rated environment, and obviously The Wild Bunch changed all of that. But like, this type of movie, I think, deals with the realities more of how the West actually was, while also kind of allowing itself to play with some of those themes that made the Western such a staple of American cinema. And, I don't know if this film is as good as those, because those are, bona fide masterpieces, but, like, this film is certainly playing with a pulse that, like, those films couldn't have done with the way that film has evolved. So I think there's such a cool dialogue that this film's having with the past. And even, like you say, with recent past, like a movie like Jane Doe Unchained, which is incredibly, or The Hateful Eight, which is Tarantino's kind of effort to really pay homage to the genre that I think in part made him.
Yeah, I would agree. But yeah, I mean, is there anything? Because I have some criticisms, but I didn't know if you had any in particular. I mean, I want to make sure, of course, that we kind of got more into like what we liked about the film. But there's anything in particular that kind of didn't quite work for you, or you wasn't quite a fan of?
I think the script is not the best thing about it. I liked the way that the third act plays out. The third act is like just one of the most enjoyable things you'll see in a movie this year, and one of the best.
Great shootout stuff right there.
But like, one of the difficult things I think about it is that the script at times, I think, can be a little so focused on moving the action and kind of playing with the different things that are going on that you kind of lose sight on, honestly, I think there's, it's one of those things where I think the people that obviously, Samuel was involved with the script writing process with Boaz Yakin, who's kind of a veteran screenwriter. I don't think they necessarily had the strongest, like, bone for bone script, but I think that it makes up for it with just the stylishness that's been going on. I think that in part that's just such a great, thing that kind of covers up at times the fact that this isn't the deepest movie.
Yeah, I think, just for me, I think ultimately it's just about the length, I guess, and because the middle segment for me just kind of drags a little bit, and because it is like the action, it is front loaded to beginning and, like I said, the end of the film. So the fact that the middle kind of feels a little bit rudderless, where it is a lot of characters just kind of talking in rooms together, it does, I feel like, unfortunately lose some of its momentum in those segments. I think that's one thing that prevents me from like outright loving the film, is that I just think James Samuel, as a first-time filmmaker, even though he is able to be stylish and have fun and kind of really bring a good energy to this, I think there are just some moments in the middle where he just doesn't quite capture that same enthusiasm. There's like some scenes that I feel a bit almost procedural. Like he kind of has to do this to lay the groundwork for what he wants to do at the beginning and the end of the film. But I don't think it's the worst in the world. I just think it's something that kind of holds it back a little bit from being not quite as effective as I would hope it to be. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think what's worth championing is really what's worth highlighting here. I mean, any criticisms that I would have about it are, I think, shadowed by what I find really effective and really engaging about the film, especially for a Netflix original.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can tell that Samuels has like a history in doing visual albums. Like he's worked on, helping artists bring their music to life in a visual way. And I think that is kind of a cool voice that we don't always get to see in movies these days. And I think that as he continues to involve his directorial career, that's going to continue to serve him well, because I think it's just such an unmined area. Like, obviously, one of the most landmark visual works of the last 10 years is Beyonce's Lemonade. And this reminded me a lot of the way that it's kind of that music video-y format. And we've seen directors come out of music video careers and make films, but the way that Samuel kind of almost infuses more of how do you make the music video and cut the music video. And I think at times, like, I'm surprised it wasn't more economical with its run length because of his history there. I thought that the editing was really strong and the way that he kind of weaves everything together.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell that it was that long. I think the movie just kind of flew by for me because I was so engaged. But like, sure. I definitely feel like that if the film had like a stronger script, it could have been like great.
Yeah.
But as it is, I think it's an incredibly good film. And when you have that ensemble that's so stacked, like Elba was my favorite part about it. I think just the presence and the gravitas and just the way he built a character without saying a lot, just with his body language, and the way that the script that's the one thing the script does really well, is build around him and kind of create this atmosphere around this kind of villainous character who's so much more complicated. I always loved Majors. I thought he was good, but honestly, outside of Elba, the best performance to me was Danielle Deadwyler, who plays Cuffy, who's kind of a very subtle gunslinger who's not very, people overestimate her, and she's actually probably the best shot of any of them at the end of it. But like, there's someone I didn't really know before this, and she was so good, and her presence was so strong to where like she would be in a scene with like these big actors and not act all of them, and that was just such a cool little thing that I think she will definitely get some more. And then she's on a Tyler Perry soap opera called The Haves and Haves Not. And I'm curious if her career is really going to take off after this, because she's had a nice little career so far, but I think that there's a lot more coming her way. And there is, because she's going to be in the film about Emmett Lewis Till's mother.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, Emmett Till, the horrible situation that happened there, she's the star of it. So, Chione Chukwu, who did Clemency in 2019, I believe that came out, Viola Davis film about the death penalty. That's a big role for her. Yep. So I think that something may have gotten said somewhere that's like, hey, this person's really good, because I think she was like clearly one of the best parts of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably the best find of the film, and certainly I think, like you said, like I think the fact that she's able to hold her own with these really powerhouse actors, whether they be, established veterans like Delroy Lindo and Idris Elba, or, up and comers like Jonathan Majors and Zazie Beetz, but also giving a fairly subtle, often intuitive performance at the same time is a great credit to her as an actress in this film. I think the performances in general are often quite strong. I think almost by design, the villains are maybe a little bit more interesting and charismatic than Jonathan Majors in this, but that's nothing against Jonathan Majors. I just think he kind of gets stuck with the kind of more.
He's been better, but he's still good.
Yeah, I think he fits the bill. I think he gets what you need out of him for this. It's kind of like, I think Lakeith Stanfield and Idris Elba and Regina King are probably having a little bit more fun with their roles because they get a little bit more like kind of scene chewy parts. But I don't think anyone's walking out of this like feeling underutilized, which is something I really respect about it, especially from the main cast. But yeah, I think that's kind of my general roundabout thoughts. I think it's a well-made, entertaining film. Maybe not like the most profound entry in the genre, but certainly one that I think provides a lot of fun thrills and proves to be a good showcase for its first-time filmmaker. But is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
I wish they would make more movies like this, because I feel like when people make Westerns, I think the best Western of the last 5 years was Scott Cooper's Hostiles. I think that's like borderline masterpiece level filmmaking. Like, I wouldn't say the N-word for it, but I think it's incredibly well done. Have you seen Hostiles?
No, actually, we were talking about that in my other bonus episode. Funny enough to tie it together, we were talking about that during Antlers, because we covered that's
Hostiles. That's a good movie.
Is it? Yeah, I mean,
Hostiles
that's the only Scott Cooper film I haven't seen, surprisingly.
No, that is, if you hop on it like soon, I think you'd really find a lot in it. Like, I think it's a movie that came out at a really weird time in the award season.
Yeah, it didn't really
position itself.
Yeah.
But and then the distributor isn't even around. It was Open Road that did it, so it was like.
Oh yeah, that's right. Strange. Yeah, because it kind of just like farted into theaters, just kind of just like here it is, And it's like,
Yes.
what do we do with this? I don't know.
And
Is it awards
it's
still?
excellent.
Yeah.
Like, it was, I think, one of the best movies that came out that year. Like, I wish I could have redone my top 10 in 17 because it would have been pretty high up on it. Like, it's great. But, like, I think a movie like that is excellent. But I think that people, when they approach Westerns, it's kind of like the Assassination by Jesse James approach, where it's like it's very serious, it's very dour, focusing on just the grimness of what it was like to grow up to be in that era. And certainly it was not always grim, but like one of the best Westerns ever is Blazing Saddles, which is incredibly sardonic and, you know, satirical in dealing with the horrors of the time, but in a very light way that kind of was very subversive at the time with the way it kind of broke through the noise of. I think people forget how transgressive that film is, like in terms of when it was made. But like,
Sure.
I think you can have fun with a Western while also pointing out how crappy things were back then. And I think this is a great example of that. And I'd love to see more people play with the genre, with the kind of, because again, you can't really do gold oldies anymore. Like, you have to kind of talk about the difficulties of what happened at that time, the myriad of them. But I think that there's a cool way you can kind of do, you can have it both ways. Like, I think this film has done, I think Django Unchained obviously did. Like, you can deal with the seriousness while also playing into those spaghetti tendencies that kind of helped revitalize the genre as something that really has lasted. So it's no Leone, but like, again, I think Jamie Samuel has a really cool career ahead of him, and I'm very curious to see if he'll like make a sequel to this, or it kind of seems like it may have one coming at some point.
The ending, yeah.
And I'm sure Netflix, with the way it's like the #1 movie on Netflix right now, so I'm sure they would love to make another one if he's into it. So I'm curious to see where this will go. I'd watch more of this for sure, and I'd rather watch a sequel to this than another Marvel movie. So it's just like,
Sure.
You know, I'm very pro this movie. So I give it an A- at the end of the day. I think if you'd asked me right after I saw it, I would have given it an A. But I think as time has gone on, it's like I think it's a really strong A-. It's kind of verging on A.
Yeah, I forgot to mention we don't actually do ratings anymore.
Oh, well.
But
yeah.
Since you gave one, I will give one as well. I'm not quite as high as you, but I'm certainly quite high. I think I gave it like a firm B. Like I enjoyed it a lot. I definitely got what I wanted out of the film. I don't think I'm going to be like thinking about it a lot or like really meditating on a lot, but I think I got what I wanted out of the film. And like, if I think about like recent Westerns, I would give an A. Like, I think of like Proposition or maybe like Django Unchained, The Assassination of Jesse James you mentioned, maybe Bone Tomahawk.
I need to see Bone Tomahawk.
Bone Tomahawk. I definitely would love to hear what you think of Bone Tomahawk, because I like it a lot. It is a brutal film. But it's certainly one worth watching. But yeah, I mean, I'd certainly say this is among the really solid recent Westerns that we've gotten. And unfortunately, those are fairly few and far between nowadays. So certainly nice to see Netflix footing the bill and putting something like this out. Justifies putting out any number of garbage, forgettable films that they put out on a weekly basis, I think. So yeah, well, thanks again, Corey, for joining me. Of course. And, if you guys want to check out the film, if you haven't already, it's available now on streaming on Netflix. So
it is indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice, or find us on YouTube. See you all next time.